I've been asked a few times for an update on our Tractive XL experience. Now that we're a year in, here is kind of my overall review of this device. And at the end, I'll tell you why we're not going to be renewing next year. So that gives you an idea of where this is going. This isn't to say it's a bad device. I'll just explain why it's not for us. So to start off with, what is this? The Tractive XL is a fitness tracker / GPS device for dogs. So you attach it to their collar. You can use any collar you want. It slips through here, you cover it up, and it tracks their active minutes. It tracks their sleep. It actually has pretty comprehensive tracking, I found. And there were a few reasons why I went with this over other options. The first is that I liked that it worked anywhere. This was predominantly meant to be a GPS system for us to find Vigo if ever, God forbid, he were to get lost. Whereas something like the Apple AirTag requires Bluetooth, this in theory should work everywhere. I also loved that it comes with a light and a beeping noise. So like, let's say that Vigo was in a forest and I knew he was there, but I couldn't see him. I could turn on the light of this and find him, or I could turn on a little beeping sound that comes from this and find him that way. Those were really great features of this product. The next thing that I liked about it was the battery life. So the Tractive actually makes two versions of this the last time I checked. This is the XL, and the battery life on this is 19 days. I would say that in some cases we got more than 19 days from one charge of this. And I loved that because I thought, I'm lazy. I don't want to be charging my dog's GPS collar every week, and once a month-ish felt doable. The final thing that I liked about it, as I touched on earlier, is the stats. So I love looking at numbers, especially when Vigo was a younger puppy. I loved seeing how much activity he'd had, making sure he'd met his required amount. I found that really, really helpful and interesting to get access and insight into. Now for the negatives of this. First negative, specifically of the XL, is that it looks a little bit like an e-collar. I've touched on this before, and for some people this might not be a negative. For me, rightly or wrongly, no judgment to anyone who uses e-collars, but I feel judgment when people ask me if this is an e-collar and if I can shock him with it, because it doesn't do that at all. I've had people who asked me multiple times, can you shock him with that? And I kept telling them the answer no, and I felt like they thought I was lying. I digress. Rightly or wrongly, you might get questions about if this is an e-collar. The next thing that was kind of a negative for us was that after a while, I kind of stopped checking in with the stats. It was really interesting to begin with, but it was definitely like a shiny object syndrome for me at least, where after a few months, it became less interesting because I was kind of seeing the same thing every single day. When I was on holiday and people were dog sitting Vigo, this was interesting to be able to log in and just see how much activity he'd gotten, how he was sleeping. But when he was at home, which of course is most of the time, this wasn't as interesting for us. The last negative, which was a huge, I think, pain point for my husband in particular, was the size of this. So Vigo technically should fit in with the recommended size for this device. If you go online, they'll tell you the kind of the weight range that they recommend, the standard versus the larger one. So he is technically big enough for this, but my husband in particular feels like it looks like he's uncomfortable wearing it, like it's very heavy. For the record, I don't think it looks uncomfortable or too heavy, but we have had numerous people tell us that it looks very big on him, that it looks too big on him. So maybe for a bigger dog, that would be less of an issue. But with Vigo's size, it was definitely something that I think was a pain point for my husband in particular. On that note, my husband the other night turned to me and he was like, I don't think we should renew with the Tractive. I don't want to renew with the Tractive. Let's try and find something else, because he really doesn't like this device, specifically the look of this device. So he said he'd be open to the Tractive regular size. My problem with the regular size is how frequently you have to charge it. I think it has a charge of like a week. And I just, as I said before, don't see us charging a device every single week and remembering to do that, especially when we're about to become parents. I just think we're gonna have too much going on. So with that in mind, we're gonna be canceling our subscription with Tractive XL and exploring other options. So with that in mind, I would love to hear if you use some kind of GPS tracker for your dog and you like it, please let me know. I think my two main criteria are around working anywhere. So if we were to go camping in the middle of nowhere and Vigo were to get lost, that we'd be able to find him, not relying on Bluetooth. So I think AirTags are out for us. The second criteria is battery life. So it needs to be able to last a good chunk of time, ideally more than a week. And then I guess I need to have a third criteria, which is that it can't be this big. It has to be smaller. Would love your help in choosing our next GPS tracker for Vigo.